only if it is a needs-based system rather than a wants-based system can you have some form of economic democracy. And that would be the basis of Swaraj, and that while therefore at the moment what we have is only party multi-party अभी जो है वो डेमोक्रेसी नहीं है, खाली पार्टीक्रेसी है. And JP had spoken about a party-less democracy, which आपने कहा कि that is an idea that we should pay closer attention to. And a combination of that and Gandhiji's idea of Gram Sabha would have Gram Swaraj would have some promise. So that's just a recap. So suddenly we decided to make a group out of it. So here we are, and now it's open.
The second part of it, the Gram Swaraj part, the example that I gave earlier seems to me a very interesting example to not necessarily emulate but to learn from, where a village has declared self-rule, and the slogan which I said, that we elect the government in Bombay and Delhi, but we are the government in our village. And they follow that quite meticulously, very strictly, so that actually every government department that comes and has a scheme for that village has to take permission from the Gram Sabha. And the Gram Sabha will say yes, no, modify the scheme, completely change it. And actually, in fact, once, about 10 years back, they even had this thing where they said every department comes with its own scheme and program, and it's too confusing and contradictory for us. So we'll give you a day, we'll put up a blackboard, all the departments come on one day, give us all your total budget, and then the Gram Sabha will put the whole thing together and decide what to do with it. So, and then from there, of course, they moved much more into self-reliance, generating their own energy, resources, housing, and so on. There's still many gaps, but I think in terms of as a governance model, it's interesting. But I think the crucial thing beyond that, and that's a big question in my mind, is that that's okay at the level of maybe a village or 10 villages or a small mohalla sabha in a city. What happens at the larger levels? So when at an entire landscape decision making has to take place, or states or countries, or maybe if countries don't exist, certainly larger level decision making has to take place. That's where you need to send representatives up into an institutional body. And that's where the problems start.
That's where the parties are born.
That's where either parties are born or representatives don't really represent themselves. So that's a question I have. Since this puzzle of localized, direct, radical democracy with the representative democracy that will have to exist, the tensions between the two, which I don't know if people have.
I think the people who get elected as a representative don't remain a representative when you are in a party people. Because if, as your region that you are representing, if the majority of the people believe in particular way to do certain things, but because you belong to a particular party, you end up having your decision or your way of how you're going to state that position is going to be driven by what the party high command might say, or what is the overall direction that the party has taken. Then your representation actually is gone, and you are no more a representative of the people that you are talking to. So unless the party whip thing is gone, you will always having that same issue, that you vote as per what the high command says.
And I was trying to link this whole idea of happiness with governance, economics and people. So somewhere, suppose if you start saying, and also talking about the governance, and you talked about one village, Bhutan, even though it was ruled by a king, I was told that they had large amount of participation was possible in Bhutan. I don't know that much about Bhutan, but the people's voice was being heard there, and was respected there. This is what I've heard or read here and there. See, one thing about when you look at global, local and all that, we know that the global does not exist without locals. Without the global, local can exist. Bhutan was always a local. Even when the globe existed, Bhutan existed as a local. So without the global, local can exist. But without the local, there is no global. Likewise, between the local and the individual, if you start looking at the connectivity, without the individuals, there is no local. So if you start changing the sequence from global to local, start looking at upwards, individual to local, then to global. Maybe then the village example you gave, we take it as an example of an individual, not for individual as human being, but individual as a self-governed unit. And then if you start looking at scaling up, and if there are examples of other examples, let's say, I don't know, Bhutan could be one, or, and then see how this, and again we can connect then economic democracy to idea of happiness and all of them may come through.
One point about democracy being defined as majoritarianism, I think we've got to flag it as an issue. Is that what we're talking about? A more fundamental thing, whether it's economic democracy that we're discussing or other kinds of political democracy, that is it an end in itself, or is democracy a means to go somewhere else for something else? Pretty often we are discussing democracy as though it's an end in itself, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's a way to improve humankind and human life. Then there's this whole business about whether it's localization or whether it's the current paradigm that we're living in, there's this discomfort with all of us constantly having to be in this slot of being citizens vis-a-vis the state or vis-a-vis the community. If it's localization, maybe you're talking about your citizenry vis-a-vis the local community. Is that what it is, or is it about us being human beings first and then even citizenry coming later? Do I make sense?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, because all of these are wanting to create citizens out of human beings all the time. Whereas, and that is what we'll end up with the kind of struggles that we are having all around us. Whereas the only way to create, humane communities is, I think, by investing on alternative education, and there just are not enough numbers of us investing there. We're all caught in too many immediate things. I said too many things, but these are, things that are churning in there.
Many people, I interview, they are
So there's, in Asha, Rajni, since you asked, there's a whole set of people who are saying, can we just be left alone as farmers?
Just tell everybody the full name of Asha.
There's a network, a loose informal network called Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture, which acts as a advocacy platform. And it necessarily means that you're addressing yourself mostly to the state, wanting things from the state and so on. So there's a whole set of people who are saying, can we just be left alone? Isn't that enough? If farmers and their farming is not intruded upon, that is Swaraj. And then there's another set of people who are saying, look, we've got to stop a few things, and that will come. The stopping will come only if you engage with the state. And therefore, you've got to do that also. It's not clear whether there are enough numbers of us to do both things simultaneously. Obviously, it's required. Both are required.
Individual is the starting point of Swaraj. Then you have Gram Swaraj, and then you have layers of Swaraj.
Except
That's
Gandhi,
what he was trying to tell us actually. That's the way to look at it.
well, Gandhiji would put the family in between.
Okay.
Then
Okay.
the-
You can have as many
the
layers.
individual unit. No, because that is an important feature. Na, ki how will that person acquire the, in a sense, the capabilities to seek themselves? The individual, the family, then the community, the immediate community, which may still be smaller than the village community.
Yeah.
And then so on. And that's why the imagery of the oceanic circle, where, and therefore this question of power is central. That as long as these relationships are hierarchical, with the individual being the most insignificant, there can only be violence. When you reverse it and all the layers facilitate or become the enabling factors for the self-discovery of the individual, then the whole equation is reversed. But the question is how?
And also whether, sorry, just a quick question. I'm wondering whether the ultimate focus should be on the individual. I mean, yes, we're all human beings, but none of us are human beings were it not for other human beings. And so, to me, the fundamental unit needs to be a collective of some sort, and not the individual. Because if one focuses on the individual, then we're going in the same direction that modern westernization has done, which is to say that that individual is the most important. So I know you don't mean it in that sense, but I do think that we need to, if you look at the whole human rights discourse, one of my fundamental discomforts with it, I think it's very crucial, but one of my discomforts, and it's a discomfort a lot of indigenous peoples have also expressed, is that it's so focused on the individual's human rights that it begins to actually even discard the notion of a collectivity. And so we need to start talking about community rights or collective rights.
Can you give an example?
Huh?
Can you give an example where collective right is more important?
As an individual, I mean, you take it. The American is way of life is a very much like that. I mean, myself as an individual, I should have all the complete freedoms because I have those human rights. Now, how that impinges on somebody else is then not my concern. And I'm not worrying about what's happening even around me because I have no collective to worry about, to be conscious of. So that's the sort of issue. It can go into that extreme level, which is there. Secondly, then, all the human rights can be like your human right for life, human right for voice, etc. can be respected. But your community gets dissipated by the way government policies are. So as an individual, you still have your rights, but your community is gone. Community is gone. And that then creates all sorts of other problems. So I think that layer has to be very carefully thought of as to what we mean by an individual also. And what is that fundamental unit we're talking about?
So what's the community that's gone in this example?
Could be the indigenous people have been dissipated because they've been displaced, or economic forces have created such that they've had to migrate out. A village has got half the population is out somewhere else, another half is somewhere else, only the elders are left, children have gone off, or only the young children are there, the middle generation is gone out. So many things that happen with the kind of economic globalization or political forces we have. And every one of those as individuals might still have their individual human rights.
And the most extreme form of it, especially what is happening in America, is where the corporation is given the right of an individual and is allowed to act like an individual entity, including now recently political rights. So I mean that's the extreme form of what is.
But the problem is only in the realization of the rights, not in the way rights have been bestowed on individuals. Because in human rights articulation, in the human rights discourse, an individual is also a community. It's about all women, having equal rights, for instance. Every individual is also a representative of their community. It's in the actualization of those rights that those distortions have come in, according to me. So the fight cannot be against, the way human rights are, individual human rights.
Not against. But if you look at the discussions and debates around the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, these issues came up. Because indigenous people said you already have the UN Declaration on Human Rights, why do you want one on indigenous people's rights? One of the issues was exactly this, that human rights focuses on the individual. Indigenous peoples want rights as collectives.
So, but coming back to the American, so if it was individual rights, if there was so much of individualism, don't you think that it was natural to form local communities by these individuals and to self-organize rather than be corporate organized? It's something more is what I'm suggesting. It's not so that it is individual celebration and therefore this is happening. There is something else also happening.
No, I'm not saying this is the only.
No, I'm just saying that we should
Actually, this has an interesting. Sorry.
So I just, while people were talking, I'm just wanting to reflect, and I have a question actually for you. Oh, sorry, yeah. My name is Rajendra Raina. I'm from Pune, and I've been wondering with that question. I'm a student of how people learn, whether individuals or communities. So I'm just wondering that, are we really talking about, these are all models, religious models are Buddhism, Sikhism, political models are democracy. So where is the need for a model come? Why do we need a model? Because some great man solved some problems, and then the rest of the people couldn't figure out how did he solve it. So we kind of institutionalized that knowledge, thinking, and said, "Yaar, if I follow these 8 paths, I become a Buddha." But unfortunately, after him, no one became a Buddha because we held on to that model. So the model became a search for a model. I'm just trying to question, is that really a search for a model? Like democracy has not worked, so let's look for another thing. What will work? Instead of solving the problem, because the danger in institutionalizing a model is, it will work today. Over the years, that response was a spontaneous response of that conscious human being to the reality outside. So when he wanted to be non-violent, he said non-violence is the response. But now if in a particular situation, like someone was saying, Sita, that, don't label that this should not be done, activism is not good. So my question is, at individual as well as collective level, and a question to you. Why? Because you are supposed to be more learned than at least me. That's the advertisement. No, I'm just because you are definitely more learned, and I am kind of lost. So that's all. I mean, it could be to others also. I don't know. I don't know. Others may be more learned, but I don't know. Since I know, so I will. My question is that a problem with the model, or is that a problem with our ability to learn how to respond to an external environment to get what I want? If I want peace, how do I respond? At individual level and at collective level. And this is so dynamic because the rest of the world is changing. My ability to respond is one. And if I am able to respond, if an individual is able to respond, we are in a very quick haste to model. Let's follow this. This has worked. And no doubt it has worked. But over the years, that becomes a religion. That becomes a dogma. That becomes a set of rules. And the set of rules will not solve the problem. And what I'm amazed at is being so intelligent, we don't recognize that this model is not solving our problem. And we are still looking for one more model, and one more model, and one more model. So, can we pause and say the problem is with the model, or the problem is with our ability to observe and respond in the moment, individually and collectively? And for that, do you need a model? मॉडल माने एक तरीका, एक काम करने का तरीका जिसको हम कोड कर देते हैं, फ्रेमवर्क,
ढांचा, पद्धति, एक जो
एक पद्धति,
सेट ऑफ प्रिंसिपल्स, प्रैक्टिसेस, रूल्स, रेगुलेशंस.
जैसे एक पद्धति, एक तरीका, चाहे जैसे एक तरीका हमने सोचा कि डेमोक्रेसी एक तरीका, शायद एक टाइम पे वो ज़रूरी था, शायद वो काम कर गया, शायद उसी वजह से हमें आज़ादी मिली. लेकिन अगर कोई तरीके को हम ऐसा कागज़ पर लिख के कोड कर देते हैं और बोलते हैं अब सब लोग यही फॉलो करेंगे, शायद वो कोड करना और उसको वही शायद हावी हो जाता है हम पे, क्योंकि हम एज ए इंडिविजुअल्स हमारी सेंसिंग बड़ी स्ट्रांग है कि यार ये काम नहीं कर रहा है. फिर हमको लगता है कि ये कॉरपोरेट ने मुझे पकड़ लिया है, ये सरकार ने मुझे पकड़ लिया है. तो पकड़ा तो उस चीज़ ने है जिसको हमने बंद करके रखा है और उसको हमने सैक्रोसेंट मान लिया और वो काम ही नहीं कर रहा है. तो क्या करें ताकि हम इंडिविजुअली एंड कलेक्टिवली क्विकली रिस्पॉन्ड कर पाए। और ये जैसे इन्होंने एग्जाम्पल बताया वो बहुत सुंदर एग्जाम्पल है, लेकिन अब मैं ये सोचना चाहता हूँ कि अगर वो 10 साल पहले काम करता था और अभी भी काम कर रहा है, so there is something more to just saying that we are the government. Their ability to learn to a changing environment and responding appropriately is not about governance. It is not about a set of rules. It's something more. Correctly. That's why I'm so keen to know. Something is magic is happening there, where individuals over the years are learning how to respond to an environment which was not yesterday. So how can you make a formula out of that?
My knowledge of English is very, very limited. So therefore, sometimes I do not understand exactly what the words means, the model and when we look to the things, we have to differentiate the things at 3 levels. One is the absolute truth, and the second is the principles, siddhanta.
हिंदी में बताइए।
हाँ, हिंदी में बोलिए।
अच्छा, कोई हिंदी नहीं जाने वाला तो नहीं। एक तो परमार्थ सत्य होता है और दूसरा समृद्ध सत्य में सिद्धांत होते हैं, वो कभी परिवर्तन नहीं होता। सिद्धांत में भी एक प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत और एक दार्शनिक सिद्धांत दो हो सकते हैं। प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत, दार्शनिक सिद्धांत। The natural principle or the philosophical principle, प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत, आग जलाते हैं, पानी तरल हैं, ये ग्रेविटी हैं, ये सब प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत हैं। और लॉ ऑफ ग्रेविटी हम लोग 2500 वर्ष पहले से जानते थे, लेकिन आजकल कहते हैं कि वो पश्चात से आए हैं। न्यूटन के इसके पर एप्पल गिरे थे तब पता लगा क्योंकि उसको सब मान लेते हैं। पर अजीब है, एक बार मान्यता चल जाते हैं तो जानते नहीं मान लेते हैं, ये बड़ा गड़बड़ चीज है।
तो आपने 3 बताए, तीसरा कौन सा?
तीसरा दार्शनिक सिद्धांत, प्रकृति के सिद्धांत, दार्शनिक सिद्धांत में 2 मैंने बताया। तो अगर आप मॉडल सिद्धांत की ओर कह रहे हो तो सिद्धांत जरूर हैं। द्वेष से द्वेष खत्म नहीं होता, यह एक सिद्धांत है और इसको सनातन धर्म भी कहा गया है। द्वेष द्वेष नहीं मिटेगा, hatred can never pacify a hate or eliminate a hate. तो ये एक दार्शनिक सिद्धांत भी है और प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत दोनों हैं। और आग जलाते हैं, हवा चलते हैं, ये प्राकृतिक सिद्धांत हैं और दार्शनिक भी उसको डिनाई नहीं करते हैं, उसको काटते नहीं। और उसके बाद एक कार्य पद्धति बनते हैं। कार्य पद्धति सिद्धांतों पर आधारित तो होता है, सिद्धांतों पर आधारित होते हुए भी वो समय समय पर परिवर्तनशील होना चाहिए। वो कहीं पर एक अपरिवर्तनीय नहीं हो जाना चाहिए। जब अपरिवर्तनीय हो जाता है तो वो रूढ़ हो जाते हैं और उसमें गड़बड़ पैदा होता है।
रूढ़ हो जाना माने
When that on the basis of the principles, you create certain paddhatis, processes, strategies.
practical actions.
वर्किंग फोर्सेस कह सकते हैं,
Working
फोर्सेस ऑफ वर्क।
He said as long as those remain dynamic, it works, it's healthy. But if it gets stuck or stagnant, I think, stagnant. But the danger lies in it becoming stagnant.
पानी अपने में स्वच्छ होता है और वो जो एक ही जगह पर आप बहुत दिनों तक रोक कर रखिए वो सर जाता है, पीने लायक नहीं रहते हैं। पानी को बराबर बहना चाहिए और बहना परिवर्तन है, परिवर्तनशील उसमें बराबर रहना चाहिए। मैं आपसे सहमत हूँ कि एक पद्धति को एक जगह बिना कोई परिवर्तन के नहीं रखना चाहिए, ऐसा मेरे मान्यता है। लेकिन वो पद्धति जिस सिद्धांतों पर बने हैं, हिंसा से हिंसा को समाप्त नहीं किया जा सकता है, ये सिद्धांत कभी नहीं बदलता। हिंसा को अहिंसा से ही समाप्त किया जा सकता है, ये सिद्धांत कभी नहीं बदलते। लेकिन समय समय पर हिंसा को अहिंसा से कैसा समाना करना है, वो जो वर्किंग प्रोसेस हैं और एप्लीकेशन है, वो बराबर समय समय बराबर बदलना चाहिए और समय के अनुकूल होना चाहिए, करने वालों की क्षमता के अनुकूल होना चाहिए। वो देश काल कर्ता ये सब के ऊपर वो निर्भर है। सिद्धांत निरपेक्ष है, हिंसा से हिंसा नहीं करता है, ये सिद्धांत किस व्यक्ति पर, किस दिग पर, किस समय पर अपेक्षा नहीं, निरपेक्ष रह जाता है, वो अपेक्षित नहीं है। तो ये दो चीज थोड़ा अलग करना पड़ेगा।
मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है कि जिस स्टेज पे मैं हूँ, जिस समझ पे मैं हूँ, उस समझ में इन सिद्धांतों का, जैसे आपने बताया वायलेंस से वायलेंस नहीं आता है, तो मैं जब इसको ट्रांसलेट करता हूँ वर्किंग रूल्स में, तो वो मेरी समझ और कॉन्शियसनेस पे डिपेंडेंट है कि मुझे क्या समझ में आया। वो वायलेंस वो तो सिद्धांत है, लेकिन वो तो वर्ड्स में बोला हुआ है किसी ने। वो वर्ड्स का ट्रांसलेशन और उसका फिर ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन इनटू एक्शन में ही गड़बड़ हो जाती है। मैं उसको, गांधी जी ने क्या बोला था, मैं उसको क्या समझ रहा हूँ, आज 50 वर्षन है उसकी सेम सिद्धांत की। तो उस कन्वर्शन और वर्शन में कैसे उसको ठीक करें?
वो तो सिद्धांत या तो आप समझते हैं या आप नहीं समझते हैं, बीच में नहीं हो सकता।
Mathematics is like math.
हाँ, आप समझते हैं तो आपकी उस पर आधारित जो भी पद्धति बनेगा वो ठीक ही बनेगा। आप सिद्धांत को नहीं समझते हैं, आप मान रहे हैं, जानते नहीं हैं, मान रहे हैं, तो जो भी आपका उस पद्धति बनेगा वो भी मान्यता के ऊपर ही होगा, वो आपके प्रज्ञान के ऊपर नहीं।
उससे वो आउटपुट आएगा नहीं जो आप करते हैं।
उससे आउटपुट नहीं आ सकते हैं।
नहीं,
एक्सीडेंटली आ भी सकते हैं, नहीं भी आ सकते हैं, गलती हो सकता है, सही हो सकता है, वो एक अनुमानित ही होगा, क्योंकि आप सिद्धांत को जानते नहीं। अगर आप सिद्धांत को जानते हैं फिर भी आप उसकी एप्लीकेशन में दिग काल और जो करता है उन सब की क्षमता को ठीक से नहीं समझेंगे, वहाँ पर भी गड़बड़ होने की संभावना है। तो एक तो मैं आपकी प्रश्न में, और उससे पहले जो बात हुए थे व्यक्ति की और समष्टि की, समाज की, विश्व और समष्टि कहते हैं और व्यक्ति और समाज कह सकते हैं। व्यक्ति और समाज अंतर्ग्रंथित हैं, इंटरडिपेंडेंट हैं, तो इसलिए आधुनिक तरीका से ये दो विभाजित कर दिया है, यही गलत है। व्यक्ति को समाज से अलग एक यूनिट मान लिया है और समाज को व्यक्ति से अलग यूनिट मान लिया है, ये गलत सिद्धांत है हमारे हिसाब से। तो इसलिए व्यक्ति की अधिकार और समाज के अधिकार जो पृथक रूप से जानने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं पश्चात लोग, वो बिल्कुल गलत है। व्यक्ति के बिना समाज नहीं बनते हैं, समाज के बिना व्यक्ति नहीं होता है। मनुष्य सामाजिक प्राणी हैं, ये तो वो भी मानते हैं। वो तो मनुष्य को भी जानवर मानते हैं। द मैन इज सोशल एनिमल। हमको एनिमल बनाने की क्या जरूरत है, मनुष्य तो मनुष्य ही है। लेकिन वो कहते हैं सोशल एनिमल नहीं भी हैं तो सोशल व्यक्ति हैं। जो मनुष्य हैं सामाजिक प्राणी हैं। वो माँ बाप बेटा इतना यूनिट तो बिल्कुल आवश्यक है, उसके बिना तो मनुष्य बनेगा ही नहीं। कोई मनुष्य में जन्म लेने के लिए बाप चाहिए, माँ चाहिए, और स्वयं पैदा होगा तो भाई बहन तो होगा ही, और उसकी फिर आगे जो संबंध है वो भी होगा। तो इसलिए मनुष्य को एकदम व्यक्ति के रूप में देख नहीं सकते हैं, रख नहीं सकते। तो इसलिए सामाजिक दायित्व और व्यक्तिक दायित्व दोनों एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं। उसको हटा दे, अलग कर दिया जाएगा। हम लोग तो दायित्व की बात करते हैं, अधिकार की बात कभी नहीं करते हैं। दायित्व पूरा होगा तो अधिकार अपने आप आ जाएगा। We always talk of responsibility, and but unfortunately there is no universal declaration of human responsibility. They only talk of human rights, and when we talk of rights, then there is naturally it comes violation to each other. मेरे पूरा राइट जो हमने कल्पना किया है वो सबको हम जुटाएंगे तो हम आपके सारे राइट पर इंक्रोच होगा। वो तो क्वाइट नेचुरल है। तो इसलिए हम अपने दायित्व को पूर्ण करेंगे तो आप सबकी राइट बने रहेंगे, उससे हमारा इंक्रोचमेंट नहीं होंगे। तो ये दृश्य भेद हैं, डिफरेंट व्यू पॉइंट, जिस पॉइंट से हम देखते हैं। तब यहाँ पर बात ये होते हैं कि आप व्यक्ति का इंटरेस्ट, कुटुंब का इंटरेस्ट, समाज का इंटरेस्ट, राष्ट्र का इंटरेस्ट, ये सब एक दूसरे से मिले हुए हैं। अगर इसमें कोई भेद होता है तो राष्ट्र की इंटरेस्ट के लिए ग्राम के इंटरेस्ट को छोड़ देना चाहिए, बलिदान देना चाहिए। ग्राम के इंटरेस्ट के लिए कुटुंब का, और कुटुंब के इंटरेस्ट के लिए व्यक्ति का, ये सेक्रीफाइस करने की बात परंपरा में आते हैं। तो उससे एक व्यापक राष्ट्र की जो हित है वो सुरक्षित रखने के लिए उसके नीचे आने वाले लोगों के हित को बलिदान देना चाहिए। ये भगवान बुद्ध की सामाजिक सिद्धांत है। लेकिन चाणक्य जी ने उसको थोड़ा सा चेंज कर दिया है। कुटुंब के लिए परिवार को बलिदान देना चाहिए, और गांव के लिए कुटुंब बलिदान देना चाहिए, शहर के लिए गांव कुटुंब बलिदान देना चाहिए, और राष्ट्र के लिए शहर को बलिदान देना चाहिए। ये सब तो बुद्ध ने भी माना, चाणक्य ने माना। लेकिन चाणक्य ने स्व को सबसे ऊपर रखा है। स्व के लिए राष्ट्र को छोड़ देना चाहिए।
इसको सबसे
for the individual benefit and individual hit, even you need to sacrifice the entire state. You should. अगर स्व को बचाए रहेंगे दोबारा स्टेट बना लेंगे, उनका ये सिद्धांत है।
आपने ऐसे बोला बुद्ध ने ऐसा कहा कि चाणक्य ने दोनों डिफरेंट व्यूज। वन व्यू इज दैट कि अपने राष्ट्र के इंटरेस्ट के लिए गांव का इंटरेस्ट छोड़ देना चाहिए।
जी,
ये बुद्ध ने बोला है।
बुद्ध चाणक्य दोनों सहमत है। हाँ, लेकिन स्व के लिए राष्ट्र को छोड़ देना चाहिए, ये को चाणक्य कहते हैं। बुद्ध कहते हैं घर के लिए, फैमिली के लिए स्व को छोड़ देना चाहिए। तो यहाँ से शुरू होता है।
चाणक्य का कहना है कि अगर स्व को आप बचा लोगे तो राज्य आप फिर बना लोगे।
स्व के लिए राज को भी छोड़ दो।
बट राजचंदन जी वो ये सभी के लिए कह रहा है कि बट के वो जो राजा है जिसके लिए वो नीति लिख रहा है उसके लिए मतलब साधारण व्यक्ति के लिए
मेरा यही पॉइंट था कि चाणक्य ने जब कुछ कहा था तो वो एक रिस्पॉन्स था उस पर्टिकुलर सिचुएशन का, हमको नहीं मालूम। तो दिक्कत ये हमने चाणक्य जी ने ये किया इसलिए ये सही है या बुद्ध जी ने ये कहा इसलिए सही है, वहाँ हम फंस जाते हैं। सही
लेकिन सिद्धांत का हम देखा जाए तो 2 की जगह 1 को बलिदान देना चाहिए, ये संख्या के हिसाब से और स्व और पर के हिसाब से। स्व और पर में कहीं हित का टकराव होता है, पर को ज्यादा महत्व देना चाहिए। ये एक मनुष्यता के एक आचरण होता है उसमें आता है।
मतलब put others before yourself.
Sorry, I taking lot of time. I don't know whether.
No, the point is, who will decide who has to be sacrificed? By what process you will decide that farmers should be sacrificed and you let companies put GM?
No, I wouldn't take it. One second. Let's stay with the principle.
No, the principle he says that the individual can be sacrificed for the.
No, one sec. It doesn't work like that. मैंने मुझे जैसे समझ आया है.
English? I don't follow Hindi very well.
See, this concept is also very dear, and Gandhiji talks about it at length in Hind-Swaraj.
Yes.
He is saying this as a very voluntary thing. Please, this is very important. It is, if somebody else is doing it, it's not a sacrifice, then it's an aggression. By definition, a sacrifice can only come from the volition of the person making. So that's
not as a rule.
Don't create that linguistic confusion.
Okay,
it cannot be imposed.
I take a responsibility to let the community gain, or the community says let the nation
by
gain.
definition,
And I see the reason why to do that.
A responsibility rests with the person exercising that responsibility. Only they can make the sacrifice. If somebody else imposes a decision on them, it's not a sacrifice.
It's like somebody saying कि नर्मदा डैम होना चाहिए, आपको sacrifice करना चाहिए.
तो वो गलत है.
वो नहीं, वैसा नहीं.
वो नहीं हो सकता. But so गांधी जी को ये इसलिए मुझे लगता है, आप प्लीज बताइए कि मुझे ठीक समझ आया कि नहीं. Why गांधी जी thinks this is not only possible but the most appropriate way to proceed is because first of all he sees the individual as being internally dynamic. That the individual is not a static being who is perpetual victim to his or her needs and wants. He sees the individual as a vibrant soul that is seeking its higher stages of being and constantly working towards liberation, which, as I have understood it, he sees manifested in a day-to-day life in the actions that you undertake. So he is not interested in that sit in the cave and see. Yeah. So because it's a dynamic state and all of your life is, here I have to fall back on Swami Vivekananda puts it very beautifully. The individual, the gymnasium is the soul, universe is a gymnasium in which the soul is taking exercise. So the way I have understood Gandhiji and Hind-Swaraj, he sees the whole of society as that gymnasium in which that individual soul is seeking to perfect itself. And a part of that act of perfecting is that it puts itself at the service of the family. Actually, maybe that is a more accessible word. The individual, this self-perfecting individual, as part of that sadhana, puts itself in service of the family. The family likewise must put itself at the service of the village in the service of the larger local unit, and that larger local unit puts itself at the service of the nation. But this, so we remember this is a theory, okay? It hinges on the fact that there is no oppressive top.
Yeah, that is true. मेरा जो एक
the reason why this is important to clarify, because see हमारे historical experience में ऐसा हुआ नहीं ना. So the moment you say this in today's political context, people say this is a recipe for oppression.
It's like a demand.
But if it is by volition,
then it's not, which we cannot comprehend.
No, but the reality is that there is socialization out there. For an individual to be seeking a higher level of living also, it's not as though those free spaces exist. We're all influenced by socialization processes. So it's not as self-motivated as it sounds. The fact that if one were called upon to make sacrifices, maybe in a household the woman will do it first. Maybe in a community the Dalits will do it first. Because there's a socialization that has gone into building every person, every...
It is not socialization, this is desocialization.
You say it's desocialization.
Socialization तब होगा सबको समता होगा. If equality is there, only the socialization is possible. If you make some different classes among the people, then it is a desocialization. It can never be a socialization. And these questions are very different. What I am talking about, one person should sacrifice for the many person. For example, there is a shortage of food, and in the family there are 3 people, and you have only 2 bread. Then one person should say, you eat first. So by this way, a sharing and sacrificing. But the 2 people intentionally takes away your bread, and that is not sacrifice. That is violation of the principle and the violation of the right as well. And then it can never be equated with the economic system. For example, the company has 500 membership and a village only 200 people. By number, the company is much larger, and the interest of a company should be more people's interest, and the interest of the village is less people's interest. That's absolutely not. The destruction of village has so many different implications. First of all, the natural elements can never be in private property. It belongs to all the sentient beings, all the living beings. The earth, the fire, the water, the air and the space. This cannot be privatized. But unfortunately today the rivers are being privatized, and the lands are being privatized, the forests are being privatized. This is absolutely against the law of the nature. And the violation of law of nature is the violation of interest of the entire people. The river is for entire nation, people of the nation. And the space and the earth, no one can have cling on it as ownership. There can only be workers, users. You are
trustees.
Yeah, trustees. That is the different way of living.
वायलेशन हो रहा है, हो रहा है अभी हमारे सामने,
बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा
हो रहा है ना. तो हमें इन जो 3 लेयर्स आपने बताया, एक तो सत्य है एकदम, एक उसके ऊपर प्रिंसिपल्स, उसके नीचे वर्किंग मैकेनिज्म. तो वर्किंग मैकेनिज्म काम नहीं कर रही है, तो हम सब देख रहे हैं, और हमें ये भी समझ में आ रहा है कि वो असत्य पे निर्भर है. वो सारे असत्य पे किसी ने बना दिया, अब हम उनको फॉलो कर रहे हैं. अब क्या करें, क्योंकि वो जो ये सिस्टम है ये इतना प्रभावी हो गया है सालों से. अब हमें दिखते हुए भी हमसे समझ में आ गया कि दे आर फाउंडेड ऑन रॉन्ग प्रिंसिपल्स, एंड दोज रॉन्ग प्रिंसिपल्स आर अल्टीमेटली फाउंडेड ऑन अनट्रूथ. That we have understood. But what do I do now?
We shall have to oppose.
But
Of course.
But resistance, like you said, that is violating that principle of hatred or violence against violence. No.
Resistance doesn't have to come from
Resistance with a compassion.
Violence against violence. So non-violent resistance.
Non-violent resistance, of course.
पर उतनी देर में बहुत टाइम निकल जाएगा, बहुत नुकसान हो जाएगा और शायद irreversible भी होगा. There are no shortcuts.
That is dissent. You have to resist.
और देखिए, if real non-violence resistance is there, then no force of violence can validate it. The problem is we are not able to put any real non-violence resistance. गांधी जी को सत्याग्रह करने वाले क्वालिफाइड आदमी एक से ज़्यादा नहीं मिले थे. उन्होंने कई जगह कहा है कि अगर 100 आदमी मिल जाए तो 24 घंटे में ब्रिटिश राज समाप्त हो जाएगा. लेकिन नॉन वायलेंस रेजिस्टेंस इज सो पावरफुल बट इट्स वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू प्रैक्टिस, क्योंकि हम एक्शन की अगेंस्ट में रेजिस्ट करना है, व्यक्ति के अगेंस्ट में नहीं करना है. व्यक्ति के प्रति कंपैशनेट माइंड रखना होगा, उनके प्रति दया रखना होगा और उनको अपने भाई जैसा समझना होगा. उनका हृदय परिवर्तन के लिए उनकी जो कार्य हैं उसको हम कई बड़ा कठिन काम है.
व्यक्ति, परिवार, समाज, कम्युनिटी, विलेज जो भी है, और फिर राष्ट्र तक का तो मुझे समझ आता है कि थोड़ा सा एकदम जैसे प्राकृतिक जैसा ही है, हिस्टोरिकल. पर ये जो राष्ट्र है, जो नेशन स्टेट जो है, मुझे लगता है कि नेशन और नेशन स्टेट, खासकर नेशन स्टेट जो है, वो भी एक हिंसाजनक और हिस्टोरिकल एक्सीडेंट है, क्योंकि वो लोगों को विभाजित करता है. अब जी सीमा बांधता है. जो लोग नेचुरली एक दूसरे के साथ में संबंध रखते थे, उनके बीच में एक सीमा बन जाती है. अब भारत, बांग्लादेश, पाकिस्तान, चीन, ये तो एक उदाहरण हमारे सामने है. तो मुझे लगता है कि अगर स्वराज की बात करनी है तो एक सवाल है मेरे दिमाग में, तो अल्टीमेटली हमें नेशन स्टेट बाउंड्रीज को भी चैलेंज तो करना ही पड़ेगा. तो नहीं, मैं इसलिए क्योंकि वो जो एक maybe when you said nation, it doesn't mean nation.
Doesn't mean a political boundary of
It
a
means
nation.
peoples.
Yes.
It could be an
So
ecosystem.
village, peoples. That's it. But I
Regional people.
Bioregion.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, in the debates on or discussions on Swaraj.
तो ये आवश्यक नहीं है कि कोई नेशन है तो उसको स्टेट होना चाहिए. मल्टी नेशन स्टेट भी हो सकते हैं और एक नेशन का अनेक स्टेट भी हो सकते हैं. स्टेट इज एक्ट ऑफ मैनेजमेंट ऑफ टेरिटरी और मैनेजमेंट ऑफ पीपल. उसमें कहीं भी हो सकता है. नेशन स्टेट थ्योरी जो है वो गलत थ्योरी है. और दूसरा ये है कि नेशन अगर डिविसिव होता है तब वो मनुष्य के काम का नहीं है, बांटने वाला होता है. कृष्णमूर्ति जी को न्यूयॉर्क में यूनेस्को ने एक भाषण देने के लिए बुलाया था यूएन हेडक्वार्टर में. तो उनका भाषण शुरू होता है, द नेशंस कैन नेवर बी यूनाइटेड. So this statement is very important statement. आपके सवाल की बिल्कुल हुआ.
Incidentally, you were asking me about earlier the model and the power of observation. Krishnamurti actually also refers to them. Finally says if we can observe, we need no model. And if it is a model, we cannot observe. I'm just words are mine. Observe his.
तो मुझे हमेशा लगता है कि हम we are chasing the wrong goose.
Maybe yes. I just picked up some lines. I just picked up a couple of lines from out there. But then you mentioned, you quoted Gandhiji saying, sacrifice is an individual choice and volition. And गुरु जी आप बता रहे थे कि ना दिस होल व्यक्ति, समष्टि, कुटुंब, देश वगैरह जो आपने बोल रहे थे, वहाँ भी वो व्यक्ति का एक जो रेफरेंस टू व्यक्ति. You mentioning Kavita about the citizenry, whether it's a local, global, whatever, but the sense of citizenry, let's call it a citizen, whether for the lack of better word at the moment. Ashish was talking about should we focus at the individual or should we focus at the collective community and all this. I'm just picked up all these sentences because spoken by different people. ये सारे में एक व्यक्ति का एक पात्र है वैसे. So all these thoughts, all these ideologies have come from the idea of a व्यक्ति, idea of an individual. अगर हमें whether it's Swaraj or whether it's finally happiness or local, global, whatever, what could be the role of an individual? व्यक्ति का क्या स्थान होता है वैसे पूरे. एक तो आपने ये भी बोला कि जो हित होते हैं, व्यक्ति का हित, समाज का हित, कुटुंब का हित, नेशन का, एक ही हित है, वो अलग अलग हित नहीं है. आपने बोला सब एक ही हित है. They are all same interests. They are all same. हाँ, कलेक्शन होता है. But can we look at the individual and the democracy or nation separately? For example, I can add one more now. If it's a democracy and if it's a voted democracy, again there's the role of an individual in the act of voting. However rightfully or wrongfully it is done, there's an act of voting. So anyway, व्यक्ति का पात्र क्या होगा ये सब, ये पूरे विचारों में?
व्यक्ति का पात्र तो वही होगा जो अपने सर्वोन दायित्व है उसको जाने और उसको पूरा करें. भारतीय परंपरा में ऋण की बात होते हैं, मातृ ऋण, पितृ ऋण, देवर ऋण, समाज का ऋण. तो वो ऋण के बाद और कुछ नहीं है. अपने दायित्व क्या है, हमने समाज से और हमने कुटुंब से और हमने राष्ट्र से क्या क्या लाभ लिए हैं और उस लाभ लेने की प्रत्युत्तर में हमारा क्या दायित्व है वो जाना और दायित्व को पूर्ति करना. तो दायित्व कई किस्म के हो जाते हैं. एक व्यक्ति को भी वो व्यक्ति बिल्कुल अकेला नहीं रहता है. एक व्यक्ति का कई उसकी रूप होता है. अपने बच्चे के लिए वो पिता है तो अपने पिता के लिए वो बच्चे हैं और अपने स्त्री के लिए वो पति हैं और अपने भाई के लिए वो भाई हैं और समाज के लिए वो कुछ समाज का एक इकाई है. तो जैसा जैसा उसका संबंध जिसके साथ है उस संबंध से उनके दायित्व का उत्पन्न होता है और उसकी बोध होना और उसको पूर्ति करना ये व्यक्ति का वो है. और समाज का दायित्व ये है कि उसकी अंग के हर व्यक्ति की हित जो है वो सुरक्षित रहें और उसके लिए समाज का जो कोई दायित्व है वो दे. अब ये दोनों का आदान प्रदान ठीक होगा तो उनकी आंतरिक के जो परस्पर आश्रितता है और संबंध है वो ठीक ढंग से बने रहेंगे. वो ठीक ढंग से जब तक बने रहेंगे वहाँ पर समता होगा और वहाँ पर कोई विषमता नहीं होगी और ठीक ढंग से समाज चलेगा.
You remember you started with democracy and the minority.
Is it possible to...
When I was in school, I learned one sentence. Democracy is for the minority. And that's something we forgotten somewhere along the line. And it made sense when he was talking earlier before the meeting saying that the UN has something called the consensus. So even if one individual does not agree, and I think Mendaleka probably is an example of that, that consensus is different from the majority rule. And therefore the whole question of his basis, maybe now it makes sense of the whole question of partyless democracy and those kind of things. So probably we have to explore those kind of things, I think. Yeah.
So this, the link which you mentioned about between individual and the collective, and I was just trying to check with you, does that happen in that village? Do you see this kind of a synergy between the individual and the व्यक्ति और समाज का जो आपने बताया? So do you see that happening there?
Again, not as a model, लेकिन उस गांव से सिद्धांत जो निकल के आ रहे हैं और लेसन्स वो हर जगह पे, तो उस पर केस स्टडीज कई किए भी हैं. पर बिल्कुल वहाँ पे इंडिविजुअल और कम्युनिटी का हो ही रहा है. जैसे वो कंसेंसस डिसीजन मेकिंग है. इसका मतलब ये कि पूरा गांव जब मिलता है, बैठता है किसी भी निर्णय को लेने के लिए, तो हर व्यक्ति का हक बनता है कि वो अपनी आवाज़ वहाँ पे बताए, वो अपने तरफ से अपने पर्सपेक्टिव से ले रहा है। आखिर में लेकिन जो है कलेक्टिव डिसीजन होगा। लेकिन एक भी अगर व्यक्ति कहता कि मैं अभी तक नहीं मानता हूँ ये, या मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा है, तो वो चर्चा चलती रहेगी। वो तो 4 दिन भी लग सकते हैं डिसीजन में, लेकिन वो चर्चा चालू रहेगी उसमें। और आखिर में जब डिसीजन होगा तो इतना सशक्त होगा कि पूरा
संघ में भी यही है। बुद्ध के संघ में भी अगर 100 भिक्षुओं का एक संघ है तो 99 भिक्षु का सहमत हो जाता है, एक भिक्षु असहमत होता है, तो हम मेजॉरिटी हैं, तुम्हारा मत नहीं गिने या नहीं कहते। जब तक वो भिक्षु सहमत नहीं हो जाता है तब तक संक्रमण पूरा नहीं होता। उनको फिर समझाना पड़ता है, या तो वो संघ को समझाएंगे या संघ उसको समझाएंगे। तो अंततत्व जो रैशनैलिटी की बात है वो सबको सहमत होने लायक होंगे। तो ये मिनॉरिटी के ऊपर मेजॉरिटी को रूल करना, ये डिक्टेटरशिप है, ये डेमोक्रेसी नहीं है।
I have a question. This is with regards to village which is very close by. We try to do forestation there, and we went with that ego that we are doing something for the village, and
like NGO.
Yeah, like NGO kind of thrill, and about 1,000 trees, saplings we planted, and after the villagers said they will protect the trees and they will take care of the trees and water it. And but after say 3 months down the line, I went there and there was a village function there. That is a gathering of the village, and they had, in fact, forget about these saplings. Even the couple of trees which are there, they had chopped it for firewood. So it pained me a lot to see what was happening. And then I saw that the saplings were not taken care of, and all of them had perished. And with a heavy heart, in the 4th month, I wrote a report saying that this project has failed. We could not communicate to the people in the right sense. And by say 1.5 years, by some weird coincidence, I happened to pass through that same stretch of place. Suddenly I saw that while coming there, there was a big forest kind of growth. And I was surprised that, and I was so happy that something like this has happened. I went and approached the village people and spoke to them and said, I mean, it's such a nice thing that someone finally managed to do it. So they said, you only did it. So I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, because I was there and I saw nothing was there. And then you're saying, you guys only did it. So what he was saying is that we all talk about pratyaksha pramana, that is, what is visible to the eyes is what I consider as the truth. So the truth for me at that moment was that everything has got destroyed and nothing is there. But the womb of the mother, that is nature, has its own answers. So what actually had happened was the roots were intact, but only the top portion was gone. And when the rain came in, the sprouting took place and whole creation took place. And there was a forest there on the effort that we had put. So what came to me as a realization is, from my point of view, through the pratyaksha pramana, there was destruction, disconnect and agony, distress. But from the point of view of the villagers, they came back and they could lovingly go in harmony with the nature. So what my question here is that I came to realize here that there are different layers of truth, which I say truth. I heard people saying here truth, untruth, and the situation and comparing it with various layers. So is it that when we say the Swa and the Samudaya both have that manthan which has to go through, and the layers of truth, unless I cross the barriers of these various layers of truth which every moment appears to be real, and then when I come to that antaranga where I am able to see that the manthan with the samudaya has able to make me see with love, that is when I can make this voluntary sacrifice. Otherwise, it is a compel upon me. So how do I? The question now is, how do I go to that stage and reach out to that stage in every aspect of my life? This is a scattered moment that made me realize. But how do I do this? If I can understand this, then perhaps the question that arises all out here can be, addressed.
There is no ready-made answer to your question, but to obey the law of nature and being sincere is the only way to reach the truth. आज सुबह भी ये बात हो रहा था, what is localization? So in my opinion, localization is sincerity and stay with the needs.
Stay
With the needs.
within means.
Yes, within needs.
Within needs.
Needs.